it's a big lesson today. I'm going to let you into my IELTS speaking part 2 structure, and I'm convinced that it will help you speak for the full 2 minutes and increase your speaking score. Hi everyone, I'm your IELTS tutor Jack, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, comment, say hello, and become part of the IELTS Plus community. In today's lesson, I'm sharing my IELTS speaking part 2 structure, and we will go through the following sections. Firstly, I'll tell you the simple principle of my structure. Secondly, we'll go into some more detail on all the sections of the structure. And finally, I'll show you my example answer so you can see it in action. The principle of this structure is you need to break your answer into 3 different tenses: past, present, future. And there are 2 reasons why you should do this. Firstly, it's easier to generate more content. If there are different tenses, it becomes easier to separate it into totally different stories. Secondly, it will demonstrate your range of grammar. And this is so important to increase your score. Simply, your answer is going to be direct answer, of course. Then you'll have past tense, present tense, and future tense. So if you're comfortable talking in 3 different tenses, let's go on to the next section. Here is my structure. As you can see, there are 5 sections. You've got your introduction, past. In present, there's describe and opinion. And then finally, we move on to the future. Let's look at this structure in a bit more detail. In order to control your answer through 2 minutes, and that's very important, I want you to memorize the phrases for each section, the 5 sections. This is essentially signposting language, which tells the listener what you're going to say. So, part 1, the introduction, you'll start with, I'd like to tell you about, and then this will be followed with your subject. You should aim for this to take around 5 to 10 seconds. Now, immediately, you will move into the past. That's your first tense. And you'll normally start this with in the past. I've put this in brackets because I don't want this to be a fixed phrase. You may have to adapt depending on your story, but I find that most of the time I use in the past, so I suggest that for you as well. In this section, you should aim to take around 30 to 40 seconds. Now we move on to the present, and you're going to describe your subject. Here we have another fixed phrase, and that is, let me tell you a little more about subject. Now, in here, your subject doesn't have to be the overall subject of your answer. It could be any part of what you have talked about in the first section of your answer. Maybe your subject is cheese, and in your past section, you've talked about a restaurant. So you'll say, let me tell you a little more about the restaurant. So that brings you on to the present, and this will also last around 30 to 40 seconds. Next is your opinion. This is where you give your opinion on what you have just talked about. In this case, we talked about the restaurant, so we're going to give our opinion on that restaurant. Now, as you can see, I've put this in brackets again, because again, we need a little flexibility. Very often, I find, for me personally, works well in this section. This will last around 20 to 30 seconds. Finally, we move into the future, and I think this is the easiest part of the answer. You have a fixed phrase here, which is, in the future, I hope to, and you will just say something you hope related to what you were talking about. I always say the same thing. I always say, in the future, I hope to go to that place again because I had a wonderful time and I really missed that place. Something along those lines. So you're going to say what you want or will do in the future. This section will take around 15 seconds. That's my structure. Now it's time to see it in action. I'm going to use this structure with the set phrases and follow the timing as closely as I can. I will answer the question, describe a book you have read. I'd like to tell you about my favourite book, The Hobbit. In the past, my father introduced this book to me. So it's called The Hobbit and it's a fantasy book, a fantasy genre. And he said to me, Jack, I think you're really going to like this book. It was one of his favourite books as a child. And, I was around 10 or 11 years old and around the right time to read this book. Now, the book was quite difficult for me at first. I hadn't read that type of book, that length of book. But once I got into it, after about 50 or 60 pages, it turned into, a page turner. I couldn't put the book down, and I read the whole thing in only about a week. And it became a book that I read a lot. So let me tell you a little more about this book. As I said, this is in the fantasy genre, and it's about a character called the Hobbit who he has to go on a journey to a mountain and he rescues treasure from a dragon. So it's kind of a typical fantasy tale, but the depth of the characters and the different obstacles that the Hobbit comes across along the way is so well written, and there's just all these things happening which makes it difficult to put the book down. For me personally, this is one of my favorite books. And also it was a very important book in my life because up to that time, I hadn't been a big reader, but this book opened my mind to a new genre and a new type of writing. And from that time on, I just read so many books. So in the future, I hope to read more books like this. I haven't read Lord of the Rings yet, but that's definitely on my list of books that I want to read in the near future. Okay, so that's my answer. Very typical. Now I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks and notes that you should be thinking about when you use this structure. Number 1, be very, very, very strict with tense. I'm emphasizing this because so many of my students, they talk about the past, which is a big part of this answer, and don't change the verbs. So be careful. Make sure you know how to change the verbs to the past tense. Secondly, be flexible with the timing. Don't care too much about it. The timing is a guide. If you want to take a minute in one section, that's fine. Just try to go through all of the sections and most importantly, reach 2 minutes. That brings me on to my next tip. Hit 2 minutes. You don't need to finish on 2 minutes exactly, but don't finish before. Finally, and this is the tricky one, the present section of this answer is optional. The reason it's optional is sometimes you'll get a question which focuses on the past. In that case, you can still follow this structure, you can still give the description and the opinion, but they would be related about your past event. Just adjust according to the tense. So that's my structure for part 2. Never an easy section of the IELTS speaking exam, but very doable if you have the right structure and some good signposting language memorized. If you liked today's video, please show your appreciation by pressing the like button and join the IELTS Plus community by subscribing to the channel. I'll be back with more lessons in the coming weeks, so have a wonderful week and I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.